This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 283, the November 7th, 2017 Breeders' Cup Recap Edition. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you, back in the Brooklyn bunker after a long day of traveling yesterday. And joining me, as ever, from the planet Texas, the People's Champion, Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
Oh man, it's like the worst hangover in the world. It's not even from drinking; it's from it's a racing hangover. You know, all that good excitement and adrenaline for all these big races, and now we're back to just regular horses running in a circle.
What a special event it was out there at the Breeders' Cup. First of all, JK, your general impressions. What kind of job did Del Mar do on this thing?
Phenomenal. They, I was a believer that Keeneland was going to fail miserably, and they crushed it. And then I said, but Del Mar, it's too seasonal, and the city really supports racing in Lexington, and that's why it worked there. And I was wrong again. Del Mar and San Diego did a phenomenal job. It was really cool. It was my favorite day I've ever been to Del Mar, whether it was opening day or a tournament day or Pacific Classic day or anything. It was really cool. They did a great job.
One of my favorite days of racing ever. I couldn't agree with you more about the adrenaline hangover. I almost felt like cold. You know that way sometimes you get the adrenaline hit and you get like a little cold after. Like I felt like I was cold all day yesterday. There was just so much happening. Some funny personal nonsense that we'll relate a little bit later in the show or on Friday, but we want to start off by talking about the racing as well as the general event. I will make one observation about the Keeneland Del Mar Breeders' Cups versus your average Breeders' Cup. They have a different feel. And in a way, I like it better. It's almost like this private party, this private industry party when you have the Breeders' Cup in the small places. And it's great. I mean, you cannot, if you're an industry person, you cannot walk 10 feet without seeing someone you know in real life, know online, or someone you just want to know. And I met an incredibly interesting and cool array of industry people from around the world. And I feel like part of that is because we are so crammed together in a small space. The opposite side of it is, I mean, is that what the Breeders' Cup should be? Or should the Breeders' Cup be something more inclusive, a day where we try to take racing and move it more towards a general audience, because our sport is so good on those days that we could bring in more of a general audience. Anyway, it's an interesting philosophical question that the Breeders' Cup has to address, I think, going forward. But we don't need to pause on that today. We've got all winter for wonky philosophical questions. I think it's time to talk about these races a little bit, Jonathan. The Breeders' Cup Classic. Turns out it was Ali Holmes all along.
Yeah, wow. Gunrunner showed up, and what a cool horse. It's another reminder, once again, of what happens when we allow our stars to stay in racing. Ran third in the Kentucky Derby, finished his 3-year-old year well enough, but his opportunity to come back and race is what's seen him reach the pinnacle of the sport, and he's the number one horse in the world.
Absolutely earned that moniker with a tough performance. That brought up that thought, the one negative thought I'd had about Gunrunner potentially earlier. I still ended up, warming to him and having him be the top pick in the race. But that idea that he might be a flat track bully who excels when the competition is easy, but doesn't necessarily have the toughness to fight it out and win on the biggest stage. He certainly put the lie to that with that effort in the stretch the other day. Couple of questions, obviously, before we continue to dive into this race. Generally speaking, I don't think this is the right race to have this conversation on, but it pertains to all the races. So let's start here. Was the way the racetrack was playing helping dictate the outcome of races on Friday and Saturday, Jonathan?
I mean, I think that it was to a certain extent.
I definitely think it was, to tip my hand.
Yeah, I don't think that, look, I was kind of against Dre Fong. Anyways, like a lot of people look to that race as being part of the evidence packet that people are putting together that the inside wasn't good. So that race isn't the one that screams out to me. Arrogate's performance to me had nothing to do with the racetrack, the inside of the racetrack not being good. He just wasn't very good. So there's a lot of situations like that I think can be misleading. However, I do believe that that the racetrack did affect some of the outcomes of the races, and one of the things we talked about when we were walking down the stairs to go to the infield, Pete, and I don't know if you were planning on transitioning to that, but it's like, I think in this sport, as handicappers and as bettors and as trainers and as owners, we get upset when the bias is favoring horses on the inside, because it feels like it doesn't give the other horses an opportunity when they're actually running fast, and you never heard anyone complain about the rail being dead. Really, it's always like, golden rail, speed, you can't pass. You always hear that, but you don't hear a lot of people with that same moaning and groaning about, you can't wire a field, you can't wire a field. And so unfortunately, I think that track supers and racetrack superintendents and racetrack executives and people that have power to influence the racetrack, I think they always tend to not allow speed to be overly rewarded by the way the racetrack is playing, and so sometimes it can end up in days like this.
That makes sense. And I was a little surprised that it didn't appear that the track, to me, did not change between Friday and Saturday. And I think it's for that exact reason. We saw at the Breeders' Cup at Santa Anita a few years ago, Friday the paved highway, Friday the paved highway, and Saturday it appeared to be back to normal. Again, that came down to a matter of watering, almost unbelievably. Watering at a slightly different time, but it didn't seem like that happened. This was absolutely the wrong race to talk about that about, because we did have one of our very few wire-to-wire winners in Gunrunner. Just great personal story to share with the audience about this race, and I think it will tie into the Arrogate conversation, which is why I'll bring it out now. We have a good friend of the show, the Sultan of Schenectady, the Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Chris Pipito. He was in a unique position to, I'm not going to get into the whole deal, but he was able to have one of the biggest bets of his life in a very responsible, smart way. And it was all relying on Gunrunner's nose. And I had the pleasure of watching with him, and the TVs outside the Veranda Cafe, just randomly, like something in a movie. It ended up at the start of the race. It was 4 guys from the Paddock Bar hanging out at Del Mar, having this massive route on Gunrunner. And Chris reminded me of this later. 4 steps out of the gate, I said, well, Arrogate's not going to win. And I think he thought that was a little extreme, especially at the time. Was I wrong? Was there something just off about the way that he looked in those first 100 yards, JK? I mean, just not the same horse, right?
No, not the same horse. And it's really sad to say and sad to see. His last 3 races, I wish I could erase them from my mind and just remember his 3 races prior to that. 4 races prior to that, excuse me. Those are the ones that I think kind of stand out. It happens. But I think in situations like this, it makes us appreciate the great moments even more. It's just because it's nothing is guaranteed, and there's no foregone conclusions in this sport. And that's what makes it so special. That's why when he won at Dubai after missing the break, it was so electrifying, and why it grabbed all of us by the heart and grabbed us by the throat and made us feel a certain type of way. And now his showing his mortality, I think, kind of makes you appreciate those moments even more.
I think that's a fair way of looking at it. And to me, one might say, Pete, did you not see the Dubai race? Why would you say that he couldn't overcome a little bit of a, duck in at the start or whatever it was? To me, it was just such a form clue that this horse, who, if he was different than we'd seen the last few times, I'm not saying he had to go to the lead, but I feel like that horse if that horse had still existed in that way, I feel like he's at least getting a position going forward. I feel like him having another slow away. It was just clearly a case of a horse mentally showing he just wasn't what he was. And I think you kind of already answered this, Jonathan, but I'll ask it even more directly. Do Arrogate's last 3 races, how much, if at all, do they diminish his greatness in our minds? I mean, this was the horse that our colleague Mike Watchmaker and others were mentioning in the same breath, and we did too, to Secretariat after the run in Dubai. When you look back, do you think we were wrong? Do you think he was that good, and it just, that was the peak, and it's, the old Jonathan Shepard line about the horses and the stick of butter. You cut the slices of butter away, and eventually there's just no more butter.
Yeah, no, I think that it's as much as I want to try to, be sweet and kind and say that it doesn't influence his legacy. It's just not true. It does. I mean, those are the last 3 races that we remember. He wasn't beat. It's not that he was he ran his race and he was beat by a better horse. He didn't run his race in those last 3 races. And so that kind of hurts a little bit. I will try my hardest to remember the great moments. He still will go down in my mind as one of the greatest horses I've ever seen run. But his last 3 races kind of, to me, make him fall short of being the greatest horse of my lifetime. So, and maybe it's just still so new. Maybe after some time and some more reflecting and seeing other good horses kind of falter, maybe I'll kind of change how I feel. But no, I think it's definitely legacy damaging.
I'll bring in a rock and roll analogy to talk a little bit. It's not a perfect analogy at all, but they'll just give you some perspective on how I think I'm going to feel in my mind historically about Arrogate. And I'll do it talking about the Rolling Stones. And the reason it's not a perfect argument is because I think it's very easy to make the case that the Stones are, right there on certainly on one hand of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time. But one thing I feel with great confidence about the Stones is taking that one particular block of albums, sort of starting with Beggar's Banquet and going through Exile on Main Street, and even including the Let It Bleed in there, and the live record Get Your Yayas Out. I'm very happy saying that's like the greatest stretch of rock albums by a band ever. I'm not sure that you're ever going to find a better stretch of 4 races from any thoroughbred ever, from Arrogate's going right from the Travers up through the Dubai World Cup. What do you think of that idea about him?
Yeah, that was a very impressive stretch. Travers, Breeders' Cup Classic, Pegasus, and then the World Cup. Yeah, extremely impressive stretch. And no, I don't think that we'll see too many stretches like that again. But it's also possible. I mean, American Pharaoh had a pretty nice little stretch too, with what he did as a 3-year-old. Matt Bernier texted us. I don't know why he's giving us away his great line. He could probably use it on his show, but he kind of compared Arrogate to Tiger Woods a little bit with Tiger's beautiful stretch that he had of just being the most dominant player that golf has ever seen. I think his fall from grace was probably a little bit more significant. Arrogate didn't crash his car drunk and get in a fight with his wife with her, using her bridle to break his Escalade window or whatever. I think that's probably a little bit more of a larger fall from grace. Poor Arrogate didn't do anything. He didn't do anything wrong in that regard. But yeah, I think it's a good comparison of just having that great stretch of greatness and then kind of coming back to earth a little bit.
Let's go back to Gunrunner for a minute here. We'll talk about the figures and the way things look on the Timeform US pace projector. But how about that ride from Florent Geroux?
Honestly, I mean,
I don't bring you on here to be dishonest.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think he knew he was going that fast.
I thought it was brilliant. Do you want me to make the brilliant case and you can shoot it down, or do you want to elaborate?
I I don't see Flo do things like that very often. I don't see him do very aggressive things like that often. So it makes me feel as if maybe it was. I mean, I do want to give him credit for not grabbing the horse and slowing him down, but I'm not 100% sure that was like by design. He knew he was going 46 and change, 110 to the 6 furlong pole. I just think that he kind of was like blindly riding the best horse, and he just like, I'm just going to kind of let the horse roll. I don't know if I would give the ride brilliant. I thought it was a good ride.
I'll give you two reasons why I liked it. I agree with you. It's not his profile ride. I think he'd have been, happy to just let this horse, the push button horse, be a push button horse. And if somebody wanted to clear off, sit second. I think he was a little worried. I mean, I'm just, getting into his head here. But hey, it's the Players show. Players do that all the time. I'm going to go ahead and let myself do it. I think it was a way to avoid being the victim of any team tactics. I think he knew he's on the best horse, and he was able to be super aggressive without catching the worst part of the track, which was the rail. So I just feel like there were like two opportunities where a lot of riders could have made a mistake there. And I think I love the combination of those two things. I think he had to be conscious of the fact that, Bob Baffert is training half the field here. And I feel like he rode accordingly, but feel free to tell me I'm wrong.
No, I don't want to seem like the guy who's complaining about his Christmas present, right? Like I do think that it was a good ride. I'm just not sure that it was like so intentional that I would tab it as brilliant.
Okay, fair enough. A very, very, very difficult thing to do as a figure maker is make figures for 10 furlong races at Del Mar. They don't run a lot of them, and when they do, it's typically very good horses. So I was extremely surprised to see, while the pace figures are fast, 147, 147, 146 for Gunrunner, the only one of those three that's coded red on Craig's figures is that mile fraction. Now, it was also just interesting, another thing where Pipe's already like shaking his head at me for saying Arrogate was done 10 yards into the race. Then Trevor calls, I forget, he used one of his typical lines. Couldn't have been going any slower, but it was something about, how well within hand he was, or how it wasn't that fast early, to which I said aloud, getting a chuckle from the Piper, "What race are you watching?" To me, just looking at raw fractions, I think that, first thing that flashed in the head was, I think that's faster than they went in the dirt mile. But it's hard to know, because usually we can make really good assessments about pace based on pars that come from, hundreds of instances. When you don't have hundreds of instances, it's hard to know how really fast or slow they went. What is your general thought on this pace? How fast was it?
I think it was quick, but you also have to ask yourself, with the greatest horses in the world running in it, it's a little bit curious that they ran 1, 2, 3 around there. It was a merry-go-round race where Gunrunner was on the lead, stayed on the lead. Collected was second, stayed second. West Coast was third, stayed third. And War Story was the one who made up ground. He was the only one that, well, I guess Arrogate too, but he was the one that came from out of it. So I don't
Are you
know
suggesting that the track may have changed? Because it certainly wasn't merry-go-round at all the rest of the time. In fact, it appeared, like we said, with a bad rail, as is often the case, the closers would have had an advantage.
Well, no, yeah, no. I mean, it could have changed. I mean, we talk about weather, and it started to get darker. It was later in the day. One of the racetracks I've heard changes more from the morning to the evening than any other track is Del Mar. I've always heard that. So I don't know if it changed necessarily. I'm just saying I think it's a little bit curious that if it was a supersonic pace, as many would suggest that it was, then why did the top 3 runners, keep running?
I mean, I will say because they were just by far the best horses. You had a finished product in Arrogate, and maybe we had overrated, or at least I had overrated Gunavera, and then you look at the rest of the field. Mubtahish had a little trip excuse, but the rest of them aren't really supposed to run near those 3, are they?
No, but no, but you would think if they were going 46.5 that someone who had taken back and made one run would have a chance of
would get in the number at least.
Pick someone up. Yeah, pick someone up. I mean,
okay.
Like I said, they were 1, 2, 3 around there. And the other thing to keep in mind is I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure that they were all off the rail significantly. And so I don't think that the track was necessarily closer friendly or speed friendly. I think that it was probably playing better to horses that were on the outside. Roy H
makes sense.
Roy H was on the outside. He was forwardly placed. Bar of Gold never was down on the rail. She came circling. So I think it was more of an off the rail thing than it was necessarily a speed thing.
I should ask him, but I would assume that our buddy and the author of the new book, Betting with an Edge, Mike Maloney, would have had this as what he calls an O2 track, which basically means affecting the outcome of races here with more of a favoring to the outside as opposed to necessarily being all about the closers. Obviously, as we always say with track bias, we're going to know a lot more when these horses run back, and wouldn't mind asking some other expert opinions along the way and maybe sharing those in future editions of the podcast. Before we leave the Breeders' Cup Classic, I think we have our 3-year-old champ now, don't we?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that West Coast probably wrapped that thing up. Don't you think?
I would have to think so. At first, I was I hardly paid attention to his race, and I was thinking right after so much attention was focused on Gunrunner, I wasn't thinking about it right and wondering if it left the door open. But no, I mean that's a good third with a huge figure. Oh, we might as well go over the figures. Gunrunner ends up 140 on time form, and what was it on Fire 117?
I believe 117. Yeah, and the other thing, another note about West Coast is I watched the race with two trainers who I respect, and they both thought that West Coast looked the best in the post parade, and thought he was sitting on a huge race. So just a note about him moving forward. He might be coming in. Not that he's not coming into his own, but he might be one that obviously he's going to be one to be reckoned with next year.
All right, I'm going to use what you mentioned about the post parade as a segue to talk about the Breeders' Cup Turf, unless you have any final thoughts on the Classic before we move along.
No, good job, Gunrunner, and too bad for Arrogate.
So the paddock, I fancy myself somebody who can get a couple of points of percentage points in my favor with my opinions looking at horse flesh. Was fortunate to be in a pretty solid spot up in the Veranda Cafe to get a decent look at horses. My track record of using looks in the Breeders' Cup Turf, infamously bad, simply based on what happened with Found 2 years ago at Keeneland. A lot of the regular listeners will have heard the story, and apologies for putting up with it again, but we'll tie back in quickly, I swear. I made all the same travel that Found did in 2015. I was there for I was there for Arc Day. I was there for Champions Day, and then I went to Keeneland, of course, to be there live. So I knew firsthand the effect that the travel can have. But it wasn't just some narrative thing. It was also very close to her on all three occasions. And at Keeneland in the paddock, her coat was gone, and she weighed, I'm not good at this game necessarily, but 150, 200 pounds lighter to my eye, just didn't, it was one of those, okay, there's a horse I can throw out, and ended up going super aggressive on Golden Horn, and the rest is history. Tommy Massis won and I lost. And so that's my history with this race. So I'm really, really glad I wasn't looking at the paddock with Talismanic, who I'd picked on this show and elsewhere. It was I don't know if you know this, JK, but it turned out it was a hide the women and children situation. His mind was apparently more on Seventh Heaven than it was on winning the Breeders' Cup Turf, walking around there with a fifth leg.
I was not aware. He's a striking looking colt though, so good looking guy with the white socks and the big cow face. I bet the ladies are very interested in him. Unique looking guy.
That was my route for talismanic that Matt Bernier reminded me of after. Go on with this cow face, and he got the job done. It was this race was quick. It was quick throughout, as we talked about. I had one listener, regular podcast listener, and also friend of the pod, Rob Dove, one of the top 10 pro punters in the UK today, asked me to specifically ask you, JK, about the ride on Highland Reel and what you thought of it. He was guessing you wouldn't approve.
No, I mean, look, I don't know what else he was going to do. I mean, I guess he could have gone on with it and gone to the front, but they ran quick enough as it was. I don't think that would have done him any favors. He ended up kind of getting that pocket trip and sitting that trip that you like. But man, what a classy horse! He looked in trouble at the half mile and the 3/8. Ryan Moore was pushing on him and squeezed on him pretty good there, and I thought he would kind of fall out of the back. I thought maybe he got sucked in too quickly, but he showed a little class and kept running. But I'm not really sure what he could have done differently.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'll have to ask Rob, but I was assuming he thought you meant he should just, try to gut him from the get-go. But I take your point. This is a horse who's shown push-button tendencies himself, and looking through the pace figures, I mean, it's like for someone who's used to watching New York racing, to see first pace figure of 153 on Craig's scale, it was probably going quick enough. What were your thoughts overall on the Breeders' Cup Turf?
My biggest shock was Beach Patrol. I didn't think he was going to run well, and he did. What a classy horse. It's weird. I don't know how the heck I could be so bullish on a horse for like 5 of his races of his life, and then suddenly I just like fall off of the horse, and the horse keeps winning, and I just don't get back on. I don't know what my mental block is with the whole Beach Patrol thing.
Yeah, you used to love it.
Yeah,
I remember you had a huge bet on him at Arlington in 2016, and then I feel like there was something on the tape that we talked about that, like, I think you might have pointed out to me, and then I also took to heart as a potential. We talked before about a sign of declining form when horses stop pushing away from the gate. It wasn't that. It was it like he didn't change leads one day, or can you remember what it was?
I think he got beat somewhere. It made me angry. Then I was like, I think maybe it was United Nations, where he got beat by Bigger Picture, maybe. Yeah, Bigger. He was 7-5. He got beat that day, and I just kind of was like, oh man, this must not be the same horse. So probably not fair, but probably the truth.
We have to make a lot of decisions as horse players, and some of them make us look brilliant, and some of them come back to bite us. And clearly with you and I, a little more respect to Beach Patrol down the way. The other thing I remember briefly thinking was, and this is the type of anthropomorphizing, that the word that can get, no, I did not pronounce that word correctly, that can get you into trouble. Had the idea that maybe he run second a bunch of times in a row, and they weren't like particular chandelier situations, but you just maybe got the idea that some of the will to win wasn't there. He's clearly put the lie to that and run extremely good campaign, and will probably be rewarded for it at the end of the year.
Yeah, no, I would think so. Actually, it's a good question though. Who's going to get that award, him or World Approval?
That's right. Well, that's the type of end of year award that we can debate more specifically as time goes on. But right, that's a good point I wasn't even thinking of, and probably leads us neatly into our discussion. I guess it's jumping slightly out of order, but let's go ahead and skip the Juvenile for the moment. We'll come back to that momentarily and talk about the Mile and World Approval. Another race run in the red, according to Craig's figures, all the way around. And hey, how about our friends from Canada? That Woodbine Mile form looked pretty good.
Yeah, I joked the other day that I need to find out who ran third in that race and add him to my stable mail immediately. And in fact, I'm actually going to do that right now before I forget. I thought World Approval was good. He was really good. He looked like he was in trouble, and he drew away for some really classy horses. I was clearly had my eye on the 4-horse Lancaster Bomber, which was for the Chalk Weasel himself, the only real 20-1 shot that I was really heavy on throughout the weekend, and so I kind of wanted to get him home, but running second was good enough to get something accomplished. But I thought World Approval ran good. What a cool horse, and good for the Cassies. I saw Mark Cassie do an interview after the race where Jay Pridman was asking him all the right questions about what this meant to him, with it being likely the last Breeders' Cup that him and Norman would be working on the same team. And
yeah, Norm's going out on his own.
Right. And so it was really cool to kind of see Mark get emotional about that. And
that's cool.
And how about the Cassie operation? If you have a turf miler in the United States, a lot of people might vote to send it to Chad. I don't know. The Cassies might argue with that, winning a few of these races in the last few years.
Yeah, not just this race, but the darn Queen Anne. I mean, that's some of the best mile form from a trainer in the world. That's for sure. Mark had a quote. He made an analogy. It was one of those where, I used to spend time in my life as an editor, and I wished I could have edited the quote because it was actually a brilliant quote. But he kind of used, it was an unfortunate metaphor, not as made my Rolling Stones one before it looked good, but he said, I had said to you, JK, going into this race, man, why didn't they? Doesn't it seem crazy they didn't put this horse a mile on the turf sooner? And he answered the question, and I should give full credit to my guy Emmett on Final Furlong podcast, which I had the pleasure of being on last week, and will be on again this week for relating this quote because I hadn't seen it. And he just talked about, in the Cassie quote, he talked about how his body type had changed, and he used to be this, longer, leaner horse, the type of body you're expecting to see run a mile and a half, and that he built up and had more sprinter type muscle almost. The unfortunate analogy said he used Ben Johnson as his sprinter. I wish he hadn't done that. But the point I thought was very good, and that idea that it's not always that a trainer doesn't know the right spot to put the horse in. It's that the horse tells the trainer what spot he wants to be in by how he's changing and developing physically. Many props to the Cassies for recognizing that with world approval and getting him to do what he clearly wants to be doing right now. And that's impressively winning mile races on the turf. Can't leave this race without a little bit of a mea culpa regarding Ribchester. All the people who said, he's going to be over the top. I said on form, yes, I see how that's something that could be true a certain percentage of the time. But if you bet this race on form, I thought the horse should have been 8-5. And so you're going to give me 7-2. I'm going to take that chance anyway. But it turns out, Candace Hare and many others right about Ribchester and me wrong. What other thoughts do you have on the Breeders' Cup Mile?
Bother Rocks didn't run bad. Had a little trouble in behind when they turned for home. Was blocked a little at the top of the stretch if I recall, and then in the lane was kind of stopped a little bit. He's probably one that I would give another shot. I know a lot of people are big fans of that horse. I've heard a lot of people that I respect think that he's a horse that has a grade 1 with his name on it. If you look for Elliott Silks there, obviously I wasn't heavily involved in this race, so he didn't win. If I would have bet a lot, then Elliott probably would have won.
Explain what you mean. There's a lot of new listeners today.
Yeah, and so I just have this thing with Donegal Racing. Like every time I need a horse for a big score, our friend Elliot Honecker, who's involved in Donegal Racing, they always beat me. So I wasn't alive to anything big here, and so sorry about that, Elliot. Next time I'll make sure that I do a better job wagering into a race that you have a runner.
Yeah, get him right into the winner's circle. I like using these foreign sports terms and applying them to horse racing. We talked before about the flat track bully that comes from cricket. Bogey team. That's an interesting one that applies to you and Donegal, I think. JK, you know what a bogey team is?
I have no clue. I'm still Googling that word you tried to use earlier on me.
Anthropomorphize. How can I not? Anyway, I'm just going to leave it, study up, and I'll sound like less of a moron next show. Bogey team is a team that you always have trouble with, the team that gives you a hard time in proper football as opposed to American football. But you don't. I don't know if you had from your coaching days if you had any bogey teams, but I think you do have a bogey stable.
Yeah, we did. South Lake Carroll High School, but they were good though. So what? Like they were supposed to beat us, but yeah, we never could beat them.
All right, let's reverse a little bit here and go back to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. One of both of our strongest opinions of the weekend was that Bolt Doro was going to go ahead and romp here. A lot to unpack. Well, I'll just I'll ask it to you first, though, JK. What happened?
I mean, he got an awful trip, and the winner ran huge. So it was a combination of those two things. I mean, that horse had every excuse to not run, to not hit the board and ran on. And I mean, look, I mean, he's still, to me, a horse that's going to be really dangerous moving forward. I don't know. Do you know what his buyer was?
I can look that up real quick.
And while you're doing that, I do want to point out another important part about this race.
I'll set you up. The point you were just going to make, I'll set you up with a question. Good Magic received a 100 buyer and a 118 time form. So things are going to fall in line. Bolt Doro is going to go like 112 on time form and, 92, 93 on buyer, I'm guessing, without looking at the chart.
Well, I mean, for all the people that were critical of the figure that Buyer gave, he can stand proudly with the number that he gave, because the figure pattern suggests that he was right. Now, with that said, let's give him another shot off of that trip. That trip was, like I said, was terrible. I would expect him to run better next time. But I did want to point out, I think it was really one of the best moments that I've seen in the last 10 years that I've been participating in this sport. For all of the negative attention that sometimes happens when you have that to our sport, when you have that person who questions the horse part of it. Oh, well, they're not treated blah, 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 blah. Not the full PETA angle, but like there's the little shade that you can get from time to time. Pull up that video where they had Jose Ortiz mic'd up, and it made me tear up a little bit when he was screaming that he was so excited, and he was congratulating the horse, saying, good boy, thank you. And he thanked the horse. And I just thought it was a beautiful moment that shows that, like, how many of these people care so much about these horses and understand that we couldn't have the sport without them and without their effort and their heart. And so I thought it was a really cool moment. And I've watched it probably 17 times since then. And every time it makes my throat lump up a little bit.
It's a fabulous moment. And, I'll make clear, I do think there are many ways the game could do a better job in terms of the care of the animals, whether we're talking in training or aftercare. But that doesn't mean that the vast majority of people don't love them with a great deal of intensity. And a large amount of them, certainly the ones we saw this weekend, do get treated better than most people. And it's wonderful to see a moment like that. I agree, for Ortiz and Good Magic. Let's talk about this Good Magic, though. I mean, what a performance. Probably the biggest winning margin of the 13 Breeders' Cup races. But you know what's more exciting than that to me, JK? Have you had a look at this one's pedigree?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with with a little curling on top. Yeah, no, I thought the horse was impressive. That horse took a ton of money on debut at Saratoga, and I
Travers
think
Day, right?
Yes, yeah, that typical Travers Day maiden race that always seems to produce a freak. Ask Uncle Mo. Look, he ran big, and the crazy part about it is that, I loved the horse in the Champagne. I was looking for that effort then. So, look, I think when you look at this race, there was only 3 horses that could win. It was this one, Solimini and Boldoro. But I thought Good Magic was impressive and moving in the right direction. I saw a tweet the other day, or maybe it was a text. Like, Chad's tied with, like, Todd already, I think, in Breeders' Cup wins. And he hadn't been doing it as long as Todd has. And that's pretty impressive. I think Chad, if he hasn't gotten everyone's attention, I think that he can train anything. He can train a dirt horse, a young horse, a grass horse, an old horse. So Good Magic was impressive, and he'll be one that's going to really appreciate any added distance that he gets.
Yeah, I mean, Glinda the Good by Hard Spun. This is a legit Kentucky Derby future book favorite. I will attempt to poke around and see what kind of prices are available now for the Derby on Good Magic. But I mean, given the hands that he's in, and given what we've seen on the racetrack, I mean, I know it's early to be talking Derby, and I usually don't. I'm like the last. We talk about this in the show. I'm kind of the last guy to make a Derby list. But if I had one, I know what name would be square at the top. Am I getting a little ahead of myself?
No, I mean, no. Yeah, I think you are. I mean, I don't understand why the trip and the ride that Boldoro got doesn't give you a reason to forgive the performance based on how much I know you liked him before the race.
It's a good point. I will say this, and it's honestly, it's not fair, but I hated the start. We talked about he's in what are to me unfamiliar hands, and I'm not trying to impugn Mick. I did pronounce that one right, Mick Ruiz here at all, but I'm not as familiar with his work, right? So there's some question marks about how a horse. I'm not going to feel as good about how a horse from the Mick Ruiz barn is going to develop as Chad Brown, who I've seen develop hundreds of good horses, and then you add in that form clue of just not pushing away from there. Well, it just makes me. He looked amazing. Right. I mean, the phrase I used, and it was confirmed by a horseman friend who was sitting with us as just walking by in the paddock. Visually looked like a man against boys, looked like a 3-year-old against 2-year-olds. Good Magic looked terrific, but I mean, this guy, he just looked like a different league. Almost like Dortmund used to look against horses early on, especially just in terms of size and strength. It was an Andy Reid-like advantage. But then I see that get away from there, and it just makes you wonder, like, will he develop? It even though he had a horrendous trip, and I agree with everything you're saying, my enthusiasm for the future has been a bit dampened. It'll come back real quick, you give me a nice A- workout and a good clean break away from there the next time, and I can, maybe you'll save some room for me on the bandwagon, JK. But right now, the other horse is looking a little more exciting. Both available at 12-1 right now for next year's Kentucky Derby. Do either of those prices do anything for you?
No way. I gotta wait till Christmas before I start betting Derby futures.
But aside from it's not your personal deal to bet now. I mean, those don't seem crazy to me. They both seem really good, and we haven't even talked about the other horse who ran huge.
What I'll probably do, honestly, is I'll probably bet $100 on Bolt Doro, and then I'll bet $50 on every 3-year-old or 2-year-old that Donegal has, and then one of them, one of them will win.
I love it. Let's talk Solomini for a minute. What did you think of his effort in the race?
I thought he ran well. I think he'll progress well. He's got the best dirt trainer in the world, and I didn't think that there was anything. I mean, I think that horse was probably the most likely horse to run. He was going to run first, second, or third. I think he would have been in a weird way, he would have been a really smart horse to key. And so, in hindsight's 2020, of course, just with a little bit of value there, I think he would have been a smart horse to key. But anyways, I think it was good.
Let's talk about figures. So yes, the controversial buyer speed figure question from last time, he comes out smelling like a rose here. The idea that you could have given Bolt Doro, on the raw dope, like a 113 last time, and he busted it down to 100. So on his numbers, Bolt Doro comes back to run the 91. Just to play devil's advocate for a second, though, Solomini last time, you would have gotten, I guess, like close to 100 on that other scale, and comes back and runs that race. On Beyer, he ends up going, instead of going from 100 to 93, he goes from an 87 to a 93. I don't know. It feels like the number that Beyer made the race is, it doesn't have to be right. It still could have been a way better race than that, given the trouble that Bolt Doro had and the fact that you can, in that equation of things that went wrong for him, I think you could sprinkle in a little bounce. But I mean, what are you thinking? What are you thinking now about the Beyer for the race the last day for Bolt Doro and Solomini?
Well, I need to see the trip first, So I need to see. I'm sorry. I need to see how he's going to run back off of a clean trip. We don't have it. It's too small of a sample size to make a decision there.
Sure. Oh, you're right.
Now, the other thing to keep in mind is I'm not sure about Beyer, but Alluring Star, who also ran on the day, I think her number kind of stayed the same and or improved. Paradise Woods ran similar. They were all horses that ran a mile and a 16th that day at Santa Anita. And then Solomini's number kind of stayed the same or improved. So for me, it feels like the number that Bolt Doro got or was supposed to get or whatever still could be the
Correct.
right number. It's just you got to wait and see when he gets a better trip, when he's not 6 wide and 5 wide or whatever the heck he was.
It's interesting. I hope people don't mind us going down a little bit of a speed figure rabbit hole there for a second, but folks seem to enjoy that stuff, and it's an interesting question to continue to talk about and debate, and folks should feel free to pepper us with questions if they want more on that. You can always hit us up, DRF podcast. What is it? No, I don't even know our own email address now. Clearly brain fried from the weekend. podcast@drf.com, or hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Looms Boldly. JK over there at UT Big Hair. Shall we move on to the sprint?
Let's do it.
This was a race where I think a lot of folks thought that the profile of the racetrack did come into play, given how things worked out. Roy H. gets the job done. Curiously, for a Breeders' Cup Sprint, we end up with a coded blue half on time form, and that is the way that the race really kind of played out, with speed holding for 1-2 in this race. Of course, not uncommon at the Grade 1 sprint level for that to happen as well. What were your main thoughts coming out of this year's Breeders' Cup Sprint, Jonathan?
No, it was just a frustrating race for me because it was like my best opinion and then mixed in with a worst opinion with a pretty good opinion. Like,
explain what you mean.
My best opinion was that Dre Fong was not going to run well, and he was going to face something he hadn't faced before, being drawn down inside, regardless of the questions about the track. He just wasn't going to make the lead, and if he did make the lead, he went too fast. I just was completely against Dre Fong. However, I was also completely against Roy H. So it's like I was right about the Dre Fong, and it's always rewarding when you can fade a 7-5 defending champion. And when I say fade, I mean not a ticket. But at the same time, I faded Roy H too, not a ticket. And ultimately, I paid the price for that. So it was frustrating. Imperial Hint ran well. American Pastime, Ran to the Moon didn't run as well as I would hope they would have run. Mind Your Biscuits pretty much ran the same race he ran last year in this race, where he just kind of swooped and came running late. He ran third this time, second last time. So I guess he's not quite done yet. I guess the trickiest one for me, the one that I thought was going to run better and didn't, was Talkaful. I would imagine Talkaful will still have a good 4-year-old year, and I would hope to see like Talkaful in a race like the Malibu opening day at Santa Anita.
But those East Coast sprinters do so well in California Breeders' Cup Sprints, said no one ever.
I know. Imperial Hint ran well, right?
It's true. I guess I was thinking more Belmont. Imperial Hint did run very well. I'm being cheeky.
And Mind Your Biscuits ran well too, you know?
Let's talk about Mind Your Biscuits for a second. Because this is a situation where I think when you just look at racing flow with the speed running 1-2, you want to upgrade. But that type of, wheeling out 7 wide trip might have been within the grain of the racetrack. So I feel like on one level, he's against the flow, but the track certainly wasn't hurting him at all. And that can be a tricky way to win. What do you do? How do you evaluate a horse like Biscuits going forward?
Well, I think you'll just kind of see what happens with the racetrack horses that were running outside. You'll see how they run out of this. And by the time we see Mind Your Biscuits again, you'll have a better idea. I don't know. He feels like some ambitiously campaign type of horse that could show up in something like the Cigar Mile or whatever. But and maybe he'll be the first one to run back, and you won't have anyone else to really see. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think he wanted to be outside, and that's where he came with his rally. So off of my first glance, I'd probably want to downgrade the performance, makes it feel like it's a little bit better than it looked, a little bit worse than it looked.
Let's talk for a second about, let's stop the show and have a production meeting. I really am enjoying going through these races in this kind of detail. We haven't talked about them in this level of detail off air. Downside of it, of course, is we've gotten through whatever it is, 5 races, and there are, 8 more, and we have 13 minutes left. Should we just continue going at this pace and we stop where we stop and we just pick it up on Friday? I think these races are definitely worthy of a deeper level of inspection. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, for a couple of reasons. Yeah, you're right. This is an actual production meeting into the minds of Pete and Jonathan while we're doing this. The other idea is I mean, what the heck? We did a 2.5-hour podcast last week. What's the problem if we go 30 minutes over now? We can knock all these races out, because I don't really want to take a break and then come back on Friday, because then people are trying to focus their attention elsewhere. Let's just hit them.
Well, two things about that. One, we have to make sure we're not going to make producer AJ's life miserable, but unless he comes on here in the next 2 minutes and tells us that that would be making him miserable, we can do that. The other thing is I also am booked to be on Final Furlong at some point. Let me find out when those boys need me, and maybe we'll pick up the pace a little and try to get through it, but I just don't want to compromise the quality. But anyway,
let's do it.
Let's talk about Wahida, correctly picked by Matt Bernier. Matt Bernier, by the way, in our little contest, put the screws to us like nobody's business. I wouldn't be surprised. Funny enough, DRF tournaments on the day, not funny enough, in a very smartly, the contests on Saturday were just the 9 Breeders' Cup races. I'm going to guess the total he put up, it would have gotten him very close to a seat for the World Championship of Handicapping. Obviously, Matt not eligible to play, so nothing to second guess as an employee of DRF. But boy, did he hit us with a whooping.
Yeah, man, I thought after I woke up on Saturday morning feeling good and making beautiful little charts to demonstrate how good I was, and then Matt stormed me. And you went in off the goalpost, but when you got me too.
Went in off the goalpost. I went runner to beat you on the square, buddy. I think I might have had. Did I have 0 going into the turf? Not literally 0. I think I had some place points from Rhododendron in here, who we'll get to in a second. But I needed all of Talismanic and all of Gunrunner. Little did I know when I was rooting Pipes home like a maniac, I was really rooting for you to end up with the nut emoji on Twitter.
Absolutely, I liked it. It's a good character building. I've been getting crushed here lately, haven't I? I can't win a side bet.
The Kinchin Slam seems like very long ago after you had to wear the Fu Manchu around for a week, and now you're stuck with the peanuts up there.
Absolutely. I thought Wahida was great, though. I think that this is a funny race because I think the horse that I'd love to bet out of this is going to be tough to bet out of this, and it's for a couple reasons. One, and let me say the horses, and then I'll say the reasons because it's kind of backwards. Queen's Trust had a really tough trip. And Rhododendron had a really tough trip. I thought Queen's Trust trip was probably more significant. But here's the thing. Queen's Trust and what's that?
I said you think so? I was incredulous. I thought that the Rhododendron trip was I agree Queen's Trust had a trip, but I feel like Rhododendron, who almost won despite, stopping in Tijuana for a hot dog. I think I just stole a POTUS joke subconsciously at POTUS Cap, ladies and gentlemen. I thought was clearly the worst of the two. I'll do a little Trackus work while you yap.
The thing about it is both of them ran well and they have trips, and I'd love to bet them back. Well, here's the problem. There's a couple of them. One, when they run, it's going to be really early in the morning somewhere. They're going to probably run back in the UK.
Well, Asia isn't impossible, Well, but I mean, it's not going to be like an easy time. But I don't know if the year is done for either one for sure.
The second thing is that they're probably not going to. They ran huge with these conditions, with Lasix, with firm turf, with tight turns. So it's like all of those things are going to be completely different next time they run. So it's a little bit frustrating. But I thought they ran well. I have no problem saying I was all in the Breeders' Cup betting challenge with Desita, Lady Eli, and Grand Jeté. And so the Breeders' Cup betting challenge ended for me when Wahida got home. And also another Wahida touter was our friend Mike Maloney, who was on. We did that handicapping seminar in the morning. He thought that she deserved a look and had a live shot at a bigger number.
I hate it when this happens, Jonathan, but the data appears to be in your favor. Just looking at Trackus in terms of ground loss, which amazingly has Rhododendron losing 32 feet. That's about 3 lengths, and Queen's Trust 36, 3.5 lengths. How's that possible? Do they not measure the ground lost around the dog leg?
No, I think they measure everywhere.
Interesting.
Don't argue with science now.
Yeah, you're not going to hear a lot of that. You're not going to hear a lot of that on this show. But there's. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with all of those top 3 finishers of the Euros. Props to Wahida for getting the job done. And great point about Mike Maloney, author of the new book, betting with an edge, getting a winner there for the little show we did last week. Looking forward to see where they all turn up next. One
thing about Wahida I do want to say.
Please.
One of the reasons I faded was I hated the fact that she showed up to one in the QE2 and had the foot bruise and didn't run. That was to me that was why I tossed the horse. And maybe that was an over aggressive assumption, but that was the only reason that horse was not involved in anything that I was doing. So it's a handicapping lesson for me. That they happen all the time, but I don't know how I could have done it differently.
It's tough. I mean, the other problem with I was just wrong about this, but I just thought on the tape, Wahida just didn't quite look as strong. It looked just like a little bit behind the others, and then you throw in the injury, and we weren't necessarily wrong. I mean, those 3.5 lengths. Look at what these margins are. I mean, I don't mean to be negative about Wahida. It's an awesome victory for them, and we'll see how she develops going forward. But I mean, she tripped out.
She did. She sat in the pocket. She had a phenomenal trip.
So when you get beat, it goes back to the old thing we always talk about decisions versus outcomes. You know what I mean? Like, you could have made a good decision and you get a lousy outcome, and that's a different thing. I guess you can't really complain though, given about the bet, since though you did have some serious unluck too when it came to Lady Elam.
Yeah, I mean, she had a little bit of trouble, but she just wasn't herself. She didn't have a terrible trip, just a little unlucky.
Oh, you haven't seen the closer up video, or she looked like she got jacked up pretty good early in the race. She lost a shoe and got like big cuts on both legs. I was thinking that was just total toss. I mean, obviously she's not going to run again, so not a toss in the sense of that, but I think it's a complete forgive. Just, when I look at her PP, it's like that race doesn't even exist.
Yeah, no, I mean,
am I being too much of a fanboy?
No, I don't think so. She ranged. I mean, she ranged up. I just thought that, I don't know, I'm just trying to take my medicine that I was on 3 horses that weren't good enough on the day. I'm trying not to make too many excuses.
Well, that's wise. I mean, at the end of the day, you're better off. You want to take as much on yourself as you can, just because that's what's going to make you a better horse player. How many horse players, it's the famous thing. There's even the brilliantly named bar at Del Mar, the woulda, coulda, shoulda. Well, as Frank Scattoni and I wrote long ago in 6 Secrets of Successful Bettors, woulda, coulda, shoulda doesn't get it done. You need to look as objectively as possible at your results and learn what you can, and then move forward. And speaking of moving forward, shall we go on here to the Filly and Mare Sprint?
Let's do it.
I think we can probably get into a little bit more of a speed round here. I'll start it though, just with the obvious question: Did you see any excuse for the even money favorite here, Unique Fella?
No, I mean she was aggressively ridden. She just went fast. I've heard a lot of people say how she's just this big Amazon. Maybe she's gonna just be better off going 2 turns where she doesn't have to be used so much. I mean, she was 1 clear in a time form red coated pace. I just thought it was quick for her. I don't think it's any indication of what kind of horse she's going to be. I think the notable horses that I think probably deserve some recognition is Karina Mia, who I had kind of jumped off of her bandwagon, ran really well from the inside when it felt like that was going to be tough. She did get a bit of a setup with them running fast in front of her. However, she ran well. And then Amies Mesa, who, if I think I would, my count of how many millionaires I know would have went up by about 7 if she would have won, based on Twitter and text conversations from people that I heard used her. Bar of Gold probably won't be sending Matt Bernier a Christmas card. Well, I think he said unless a bunch of New York breds show up in here. And I'm not pointing the finger. I thought she had no shot either, and I thought it was a great line. 66-1, so it's not like anyone else thought she had a chance either. So she got a setup too. She took back and they ran fast. The race doesn't really do a lot to get my blood flowing.
No, but the 2 trips, the Amies Mesa Classic, move into a hot pace, Andy Beyer, handicapping angle. Anytime you see those early fractions coated red and you see a horse go clear, in the lane and then get past. I think some people have a knee-jerk reaction that maybe they think the horse hung or whatever. They're not hanging. They're just moving a little bit inefficiently on the pace figures and getting gassed out, which is I think what happened there. Amise Mesa definitely bet backable, and Karina Mia might have been best between getting the worst part of the racetrack and having a little bit of trouble as well. I thought very, very huge effort. I could look to either of those in future efforts. Turf Sprint.
Yeah. The Rockingham Exacta. Weirdly enough, I was not on Richard's Boy, but a lot of people I know were. I actually liked Stormy Liberal more, but ultimately I made the decision to kind of not really play the race much, except for a small situation that I thought a Lady Aurelia would have just win. A friend of ours, Ryan Flanders, pointed out, Ryan Flanders, who I think he was second or third when I won the Tour, tournament player. He loved Stormy Liberal. And I think he was in a really good position moving out of in the tournament with Stormy Liberal. And he liked Stormy Liberal because a lot of people looked at the PP and thought, well, he's better down the hill. Ryan pointed out the fact that he ran in that suicidal pace duel after missing the break in the Jaipur at Belmont. And so there's a lot of reasons for him to like that horse to run better here. So, yeah, I thought it was a good race. I think it's definitely a more dynamic and different version of the Turf Sprint when it's run at this flat 5 furlongs. I sure would prefer it at 5.5, 6, or 6.5. I think it kind of allows a little bit more race dynamics, but interesting nonetheless.
It was a race at the end of the day for me that was more about who didn't show up than who did. We've seen this. I feel like if the European contingent didn't show up in this race this year, that it's just not a race that they're going to win very often. That said, I did see trouble, meaningful trouble for Marcia, even a little bit for Lady Aurelia before it all went wrong. And it's a tough. Mistakes can get exaggerated when it's that sharp. It's like the butterfly effect. Butterfly flapping its wings can cause a meteor to drop out of the sky across the globe, because little things can lead to big things when you're talking about a tight 5 around a bend. You want to follow up on that?
Yeah, well, no, I have a barred trivia question. I don't know if I'm right or not, but I'm gonna pretend I am until someone calls me on it. Who is the last Breeders' Cup winner to then run last in a Breeders' Cup race? And the answer is obviously Mongolian Saturday. So I'm hoping that that there's no other horse that's won a Breeders' Cup race and then run last in the same Breeders' Cup race, because I'd like to use that as a trivia at a bar sometime.
We'll let the anoraks out there field the answer to that one, and you can hit us up on Twitter or email us at the podcast email. I will say this also, like we've been talked about this on some of the shows. You either had to take that race on form or just sort of take it as a potentially chaotic turf sprint. And boy, did I take the wrong view. And boy, was the other view the right view there. Maybe that'll help us going forward when we look at next year's turf sprint. No matter how good or strong a favorite looks, have at least a certain portion of your play allotted to chaos.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to keep in mind is in this situation, and we won't see it again for a while, but it's never really happened, is because when we're turf sprinting at Santa Anita, it's down the hill, where down the hill specialists can usually run well. California flag, misdirection. Now the question is should we have upgraded California 5 furlong turf sprint speed like we do in the dirt races? And I think that the answer might have been yes.
I love that observation, and I concur. Let's move on, JK, to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, the first of the 9 on Saturday. What do you got for us here?
I like the Luring Star here. She ran really, really well. But Caledonia Road ran better. Got a little bit of a setup. I don't even know if she won. I don't know if I would say she ran better. Alluring Star in time form, and Craig Agree giving Alluring Star a 107 and Caledonia Road a 105.
Wow.
Because Alluring Star did all the dirty work on the front end. But they both ran well. Alluring Star is going to be dangerous for Baffert.
I
Forwardly,
lost you there for a second, JK, but it seems like you're back.
Oh, yeah. I said Alluring Star feels like the type of filly that really could be dangerous for Baffert moving forward. You know, that fast, tactical type. I would expect her to continue to improve. And that was, I mean, Separation of Powers ran well enough from the outside. I think she's one that's going to be dangerous probably down in Florida moving forward. But Caledonia Road ran well. Money Mike got it done with that wide sweeping trip. And I, you know, there wasn't a lot to take from this race. I think a lot of these races that were kind of chaos looking, appearing to be chaotic from the beginning, and they had these chaotic results like this one in the Filly and Mare Sprint. They don't really tell us a lot. At least they don't tell me a lot.
Well, we'll need plenty of time to continue to analyze as we go forward. Really interesting point you made with Caledonia Road getting an 82 buyer, but then on Craig's figures, because of the fast-coded half and 6 furlong, the pace-adjusted figures that Craig Mulkowski of Timeform US gives actually flipped who ran the better race, despite the fact that Caledonia won by open lengths. That's the kind of unique perspective you can get when you use a product like Timeform US. Let's talk about the 4 Breeders' Cup races on Friday. Shall we go from front to back or back to front?
Let's go front to back. That way we can end with the Distaff.
I like that. I like that idea. You want to kick us off?
Yeah, this was one of those races where it made me feel like this Breeders' Cup betting challenge was going to go the way that I wanted to. I started off a really big double with Rushing Fall to another horse that I'll save that drama for when we get to the next race. But I thought she was impressive. I thought she was really impressive, and I thought that we did a good job in the podcast to not pat ourselves on the back, but I do think that we did a good job.
You can pat here.
Pointing out best performance here at 15-1 as a horse that had a legit opportunity to get involved, and I thought Significant Form ran well and is going to be better going a little bit longer. I thought September ran absolutely huge, missing the break, and then rallying wide the way that she did. I thought she was big. I thought the race was good. Rushing Fall is the real deal, and I think that when it comes time for 2-year-old champion filly, she should have an opportunity to have her name thrown in the hat.
Interesting. We'll obviously have plenty of time to talk about that. Yeah, I mean, looking at Trackus here shocks me too, because Rushing Fall, as wide as she was, best performance still ran 50 feet. Oh no, it's a minus. I'm sorry. I strike that, reverse it. Rushing Fall, clearly the worst of the trips from that perspective, with 5 extra lengths in terms of ground loss. If you want to upgrade that figure going farther, other trips to talk about in this one?
No, I don't think so. I mean they were wide. September was tough in there, tough spot, and then
she had that crazy break.
Kent DeSormo, I don't know if POTUS Capper was talking about him, but Kent looked like he might have been looking for tacos as well. Down in it. If he didn't go all the way to Tijuana, he was at least in La Jolla. But yeah, no, I thought that horse is probably one to consider as a horse to bet back, especially if they keep the horse in California running against what is not the greatest group of 2 will be turning 3-year-old grass horses in California.
Happily ended up going off the strong favorite. Props to Craig Bernick for correctly predicting that when I was saying it would be Rushing Fall. Some combination of a terrible trip and the ground. September ran huge with that absolute horrible break and rallying wide. She's not the biggest filly I've ever seen, that's for sure, but especially if she grows into herself, maybe one to keep an eye on for the Epsom Oaks next year. Significant Form, also one who I feel like just has this look where she's going to train on as well. I think we could look back at this race and see a bunch of Group Grade 1 type horses.
No, I agree. I absolutely do agree. It was a fun race. It was definitely a great way to get everything started, and Rushing Fall was impressive. Very, very impressive.
Let's go ahead and do 12 more minutes, JK. And that means we probably don't want to spend too much time on the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. this being a race that was won by a horse who was tipped not all that long ago on this very podcast by our friend Sean Tugel, who we need to get back on the show, Battle of Midway.
Yeah, no, I was happy for him, and I was happy for our friend Nick Tamara, who had a nice score with Battle of Midway. But I needed Sharp Azteca for my my new what's my new my for my new what's it called, Avatar. So if you never heard us say that before, I needed Sharp Azteca for my new avatar, and I don't mean new avatar.
I've heard needed him for my lungs. I've heard needed him for some other anatomy. I've never heard needed him for my avatar before. We're gonna have to start using that.
I needed him for my avatar. Look, I thought he ran big. I wish he would have gone faster. Someone pointed out that the fractions of this race were actually slower than what Gunrunner threw down. It's that jockey's dilemma thing we talk about a little bit. I think that if he would have gone a little bit quicker, he could have helped kind of put some of the other ones off the bridle. I also think that this is one of the first times we started to realize that maybe the inside wasn't where you wanted to be. He rallied very, very gamely down on the inside and just couldn't get it done. Congratulations to Battle of Midway and to Windstar and what I would imagine that race for them allows them to prop this guy up as a stallion at their beautiful farm. I think Sharp Azteca was good, and I think that regardless of what people have to say about the controversy surrounding Jorge Navarro, this is a good horse, and he continuously runs well wherever he shows up, and I think he takes a lot of questions out of whether or not he is a good horse or not.
Those are all good points. I'll take one little contrarian idea. Because of the track, I feel like because of Sharp Azteca being inside, had he gone faster, I think he finishes ahead of Battle of Midway. But I wonder if somebody coming from farther back then with honest or even red fractions on time for him doesn't come and get the job done. But it's I agree. You can forgive the effort from him. And for me, that was where I became kind of aware of the rail situation. The only person who'd mentioned it to me before that point was a friend of the podcast, Sean Borman, who was onto it a little bit earlier. But for me, actually, and this is a good little side note that I want to get in here. I was sitting next to, in the trophy room, Nissan Gabay and Kevin McFarland, and I mentioned to Nissan, like, I wonder if we look back at this day, there's going to be a lot of talk about a dead rail after that one. And there's my little side note. We've mentioned the contest a few times, and I've had umpteen questions about some purported irregularities in the way this contest was run. It's very awkward and difficult for me because I'm friends with literally everyone being talked about in here. And I want to investigate this situation much more thoroughly before I make any comments. And I just want to leave it there for now. It's not a cop-out. It's not wanting to go off half-cocked when some pretty serious allegations are being made. So just want to throw that out there. And I think we should move on to the next race.
I do want to point out that More Spirit ran poorly, and there was a lot of things that were pointing to that. So I just think that file that away in your handicapping memory bank. The absence, the 6 gate drills, all of those things.
Targets mentioned and never achieved. That's a big one for me.
Yeah, those in my opinion, I think that one of the most valuable tools in horseplay is the ability to toss a favorite. I think that's more valuable than being able to nab a 3-1, 2-1 winner.
Yeah, you did that a few times in the pick 6 that you put up for Friday, JK, that ended up incredibly one of the best displays of public handicapping I've seen, hitting 5 of 6 twice in a row in the last 2 Breeders' Cup broadcasts you've been on. So props to you for that and some excellent ideas. Obviously, you can't be as sophisticated when you're dealing with a national TV broadcast as you would be necessarily in your own play, but that's why people have to listen to the podcast and watch you on Out of the Gate to get to the next level with that stuff. But let's not linger there if you don't mind biting your tongue and just going on to the Juvenile Turf.
What do you mean? Like, do I feel like I want to make fun of someone on Twitter? No, I don't.
I thought you might want to. You took some amazing shots. To be fair, that guy take his medicine, which I respect. But let's talk about this Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf.
No, the only reason he took his medicine is because his mom told me he had to come up from the basement.
Oh, jeez, there it is.
One more shot.
Oh, man.
Look,
brutal.
I think this is a perfect transition for you to apologize on air.
Yes.
I deserve an apology.
I saw JK's tickets written out, and they were written out with number 1, Mendelssohn, in this race everywhere. And I'm not a go out of the way to tell people to have horses or to delete horses ticket. That's like the last thing I'm typically going to do. And I did feel like I redeemed myself a little bit with a horse I was going around randomly telling people to include on Saturday in Talismanic, but I couldn't have got it more wrong here. Second year in a row, we've seen a horse come from the Dewhurst who was $1 million in the Dewhurst, running on the favorable stand side rail. I've made a lot of plays against this horse in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. And last year, Lancaster Bomber messed up a lot of verticals by running second. And here, Mendelssohn gets the job done. Just looks like a horse who is late to mature, has come on for the blinkers, and ran incredibly good race. And there are even some whispers about the Kentucky Derby when it comes to Mendelssohn, given his incredible pedigree, being not only Beholder's brother, but also kin to impressive young sire Into Mischief. This horse is, I don't know if he's the most, I'm not good at this game, but if he's not the most valuable horse in training, he's getting there. Maybe he needs that grade 1 dirt win for that to happen, but things are a real setup for this guy. And also just he's Scat Daddy, right? So, I mean, obviously there's a giant hole in the world of breeding where Scat Daddy used to be. And I have a feeling some friends of the podcast and folks who work with him might be wondering if this one can't fill those shoes someday. What did you think of this race, JK?
Yeah, no, in your defense, I was just kind of trying to get a minimum out of the way. It was a defensive situation. In a normal scenario, I wouldn't have played the race. I didn't necessarily like Mendelssohn. I was just kind of included using the horse. So when you were pretty passionate about it, like you said, and you're not typically that way, I was looking for a reason to save some combinations, and so tossed them there. It wasn't catastrophic by any means, but I thought the race was good. I think I think you're right. I mean, we all kind of looked at Aidan O'Brien with kind of cross eyes, like, why are you running this horse here? He's a half the beholder, and you're running the other one there. When U.S. Navy flag would have been odds on here, and Mendelssohn would have, at least appeared to make more sense to try him on the dirt. That's why he's Aidan O'Brien and we're not. So I thought that it was good. Flame Away gave me a little bit of a cheap thrill with first time turf. He's one to keep an eye on moving forward. He kind of loomed boldly, no pun intended there for a second, and ran well. So that was another race that was a little bit tricky for me. I wasn't really sure what to do, where to go, and Mendelssohn got the job done.
I've got somebody at my door, if you can believe it. We're going to have to talk about the Distaff very quickly, and we're going to have to wrap up this podcast. Give us your thoughts very quick.
This is another situation where I'm disappointed I didn't make enough money as I faded the favorite in Stellar Win, Forever Unbridled. Ran huge. Congratulations to Johnny Velasquez and Joel Rosario, who got the mount fee sitting in the room because of the crazy switching at the last second. Abel Tasman ran well for Mike Smith, and I wish Paradise Woods would have been a little bit more forwardly placed, a little bit more aggressively ridden, and a late was overbet. And maybe you were right. Your first instinct was no east on the west. Well,
I think there was enough to put the lie to that, at least in some of the races, but it didn't. It certainly didn't work out. And of course, I came around to a late and was excited about a late, so I can't really crow about that. But Forever Unbridled, a truncated but super impressive season. From a sporting point of view, JK, I loved how we were standing out watching this race live with some of the crew, and you said, well, I'll let you say it. You remember what you said to our group before the race?
No, I don't.
You said, let's take a moment here, guys. This isn't just a race we have a bet. This is a great sporting event.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was phenomenal. Just a very exciting moment to see some of these really good fillies and mares run. And Forever Unbridled did not disappoint.
All right, folks, that is all the time we have on DRF Players Podcast. I want to thank Jonathan Kinchin. I want to thank producer AJ. I want to thank Perrin, who's hollering at me in the background, who wants me to open her Christmas keys. We will be back on Friday. May you win all your photos.